Hey, I was just sitting down here thinking, as Colton was talking a number of years ago. It must have been when Clinton was graduating from the Air Force Academy. We were all in Colorado together, and it was one of the last times that Louisa's dad was able to be with us. He was struggling with some health issues and also with Alzheimer's. And at the time, Colton's hair was just a little bit longer than it is now. And, you know, Louisa's dad still, even though he couldn't process everything, he still had his sense of humor. And he saw Colton for the first time, and I don't remember exactly what was said in the exchange, but he just stood there for a minute, and he had this kind of little grin on his face, and he said, "Oh yes, you're the missionary to the long hair people." I don't know where he got that. I mean, Colton was still in college. He wasn't a missionary to anywhere. But just seeing that long hair and, you know, in his conservative mind, trying to put it all together, Colton must be a missionary to long-haired people, and that's why he had long hair. Who are you a missionary to? I know. We're in Hawaii, and the M word is a bad word. I understand that. Missionaries have gotten a bad rap over the years. Some of it, unfortunately, probably deserved. But because of that bad rap, we don't like to use that word a whole lot because of all the baggage that goes along with it. But the reality is, a missionary is someone who is on a what? A mission, right? A mission. A mission, ultimately, in our understanding and our mindset, a mission for God. And the reality is that if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, if you've placed your faith and trust in Christ, you have been called to be a missionary. You are on mission. I'm on mission. Our missions don't all look the same, but we've been called to a mission. The problem is, so many times people say, well, you know, how do I know when God calls me? You know? I mean, a guy like Colton stands up here and he talks about, you know, going to Haiti, and it's like, man, how did he know that? Louise and I moved here 20 years ago from South Florida, and it's like, well, how did you know? You know, how do I know what God is calling me to do? I mean, what is it that lets me know that God has a calling on my life? And I think sometimes we make it really mystical, really mysterious. And then if we're honest, many times some of us think that there's only a select few, kind of a hierarchy of people. I mean, when Colton was up here, you saw the glowing halo behind his head, right? You guys saw that? But no, that's what we think sometimes, right? When someone stands up and they talk about being a missionary to a foreign place, or, you know, having some kind of unique ministry that I don't think I could ever do that, then we kind of categorize them in our mind that they're some kind of an elite group, right? There's Christians, and then there are Christians, right? There are those that God has just set apart, and they're just, I could never attain that. I could never be that. But wow, you know, they're kind of the untouchables, you know? But folks, you know what? I believe that image and that idea is part of Satan's lie to keep most of us back from doing what God wants us to do. Because the reality is that we have all been called by God for some mission. The question is not, is God calling me? The question is, what is God calling me to? Right? And so this morning, I want to very briefly, I want to look at perhaps one of the most famous callings in all of Scripture, the calling of Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. And I want to point out a few ideas from there that I think that we can incorporate into our own understanding of what it means when God calls you and me. So let's look at that Scripture briefly, and then we're going to just pull it apart. And I want to give you this morning 5 realities of when God calls. There's 5 realities in these first few verses of Genesis chapter 12. Verse 1 says this, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, and so you shall be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you, I will curse. And in you, all the families of the earth will be blessed." And I want to stop with just the first few words of verse 4. So Abram went forth. In those few verses, I think there's some very real and strong realities of when God calls that you need to be aware of. Because again, the question is not, is God calling me? The question is, what is God calling me to? If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, He is calling you. And we're going to talk about some of those ideas as we pull this apart this morning. First of all, in verse 1, he says, "Now the Lord said to Abram." Would you put this down? When God calls, it involves careful attention. It involves careful attention. God's speaking to Abram in this text, and the implication is that Abram is listening. Right? Because God speaks, Abram hears. So the implication is that Abram is listening. See, the problem with so many Christians today is that God is calling, but they haven't given their attention, and so He stops calling. Because we're not giving Him our attention on the first thing He calls us to, then he stops. Because why go any further if you haven't given Him the attention on the first thing that He's called you to? On most cell phones, and by the way, this is just a side note, personal side note. I lost my cell phone a few weeks ago, and I got a new one. And some of you have been texting me, and it's coming up blank. And it's because it's my cell phone. It's not your problem. It's my problem. But if you're not getting answers from me, or you're getting answers like with a question mark, that's why. All right. Just kind of side note. I bought the phone on eBay, just to let you know. So, just a side note. But anyway, most cell phones, when they ring, there's an option. You can ignore it. Anybody know what I'm talking about? There's an ignore thing on there. Yeah. I don't ever use it, but it's on there. And when you push that ignore, then it sends the person who's calling right into your voicemail, right? And so if someone like just insistently calls you and you just don't want to talk to them, you can just keep pushing ignore and you don't have to deal with them, right? Wouldn't it be nice if people had an ignore button like on their forehead and they came up to you and they started talking, you just pushed it and they disappeared or something like that? But we have that on cell phones, right? We can ignore, we can push that thing, and I don't have to deal with this right now. I don't have to listen to this. Maybe it's bad news. Maybe it's just someone who's bothering me, and I don't have to hear it. I kind of think that sometimes that's how we treat God. That God calls, God speaks, but we ignore it, right? We just ignore it. Man, I don't want to deal with this right now. I don't want to hear from God right now. I'm afraid of what God may call me to. I don't want to hear what He has to say. And I was thinking about this, and I thought, isn't it interesting that so many times as Christians, when we call out to God, like some major things come up in our life, right? Some tragedy or some great need. And when we call out to God, we want an answer when? Right now. I mean, God, don't push the ignore button on me, because I need an answer now, God. And so when we call out to God, we expect Him to give us an answer right away. But when it's turned around the other way, it's a different story so many times, isn't it? I can ignore, I can walk away. I don't want to hear this. I don't want to deal with this. And I'm convinced that there's a lot of believers that are walking around frustrated today. Why won't God talk to me? Why doesn't God make His will known to me when He makes it known to other people? And I'm convinced that they're in that state because they've spent time in the past ignoring God's call. And so I'm not going to give you any more information until you do what I've called you to in the first place. Why should He? And so there's a lot of followers of Christ that are walking around, I believe, frustrated because they think, wow, God speaks to them and God talks to them and God calls them, but He doesn't call me. But He has. Amen. He has in the past, but we've refused to listen to what He's saying. We've ignored it. And so He's waiting for us to do the initial thing that He's asked us to do in the first place so that He can give us some more information and take us to the next step. So when God calls, it involves careful attention, and sometimes we don't pay attention because we purposely ignore. Would you put this down? At other times, it's because we just don't hear the call. We just don't hear it. You say, well, how does that happen? Well, when I was high school, junior high, high school, the big things were Sony Walkmans. Anybody remember the Sony Walkman? Yes. Yeah. It was awesome. It was just a little bit bigger than a cassette tape. And some of you are going, what's a cassette tape? But it was great. I mean, that was the thing, wasn't it? I mean, if you had a Walkman, that was the thing because it was only like this big. And you could get ones with a clip on it, and you could actually clip it on your belt. And you had headphones, and it was the greatest thing. Sony Walkman, greatest thing, right? But it wasn't until a few years ago when MP3 players started coming out, and that was the big thing, right? And so now it's, you can get music just downloaded on your phone and everything else. But the amazing thing is, it's just been the last few years. I mean, we've had access to music forever, but it's just been the last few years that I've noticed so many people plugged in and tuned out to the world around them. Yes. I mean, and it's not just, in my day, back in the day, it was just high schoolers primarily. I mean, we all did. But now it's everybody. It's senior citizens, it's little kids, it's moms and dads. Everybody's walking around with earbuds in their ears, right? So frustrating. You try to talk to somebody and you can't see it because they got it in their clothes or something and it's coming up here like this. And so you're saying, hey, and they're just doing whatever they're doing. They can't hear. And finally you realize they've got something in the ears, right? I love walking up to the kids, and as they're, not paying attention, I just take my finger and I stick it by the cord and I just pull it out like that. Like, oh, what you doing? So I want you to listen to me, right? And what are we doing? We're tuning out everything around us, and we just want this right here. And listen, I'm not. This is not preaching that it's bad. I'm just talking about reality right now, okay? But the reality is, spiritually, we have a tendency to do that too. We have a tendency to not hear God because we're tuned in to all kinds of other things. We're tuned in to the world around us, but not to the God above us. And so as a result, we don't hear when He calls because we're so consumed with everything else going on around us that we can't hear Him. It's not that we're purposely ignoring Him. It's not like we're rebelling like the first thing that we were talking about there. It's just that I'm so in tune with what's going on around me in the world, whether it's my job or my family. I mean, good things, right? Sometimes it can even be my involvement in the church. And I'm so involved in these good things that I can't hear what God's saying anymore because I'm not tuned into His voice. And I'm not tuned into His call. And see, when it comes to God's call in our life, we've got to be at a place where we understand it involves careful attention. God spoke to Abram, but Abram was listening. And we've got to be a people that are listening. Well, it goes on in verse 1. It says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth." Would you put this down? When God calls, it not only involves careful attention, but it also involves a choice to be made. God says, Abram, go forth. You say, well, what's so big about that? Well, the word literally there in the Hebrew could be translated, go forth yourself. In other words, God is not only calling him, he's giving him a choice to make. He's putting him in a situation where Abram's going to have to decide whether he's going to do what God's asking him to do. Now you got to understand, this is God. God could make Abram do whatever he wanted him to do. If God wanted Abram in a certain place, God, who created him, who created everything just by speaking the words, could just have picked Abram up and said, Abram, you have no choice in the matter. I'm taking you and I'm sticking you over here. And that's where you're going to stay, and don't move or I'm going to squash you. Right? I mean, God could do that. But that's not what he does. He calls Abram and he puts him in a situation where he can make a choice. Abram can choose to obey God or to disobey God. He can either choose to stay or to go. He's hearing God. God is saying, this is what I want you to do. And now the choice is going to be his, and he's going to have to decide, what am I going to do here? See, folks, I know it sounds pretty simple, but for most of us, this is where the rub comes in. This is where the difficulty comes in. For most of us, I'm convinced that we know what God's calling us to do. See, because take the missionary thing and stick it out of your mind right now. God has revealed most of what he wants us to know right here. And there's some of you sitting here today that you know what God wants you to do because you've heard it. And the choice is yours. And you're choosing to stay instead of go. And again, I'm not talking about going to a foreign country. You're in a bad relationship. You know it. God's made it clear to you. You are in a situation that you need to get out of. It's been made clear. And the choice is yours. God could just move you out of that relationship, but he's not, because he's giving you the choice to love him. See, love is always a choice. You're in a situation right now where you know that if you continue in it, you are continuing in sin. And God has pointed it out and made it very clear, and you know you're in that situation. He's calling you out of it. And you've got to make a decision whether you're going to stay or you're going to go. See, this is where the rub comes in. Abram was listening. God spoke. He heard. God was putting him in a situation where now there was going to be a choice that had to be made. Well, we move on. See, because when God calls, it not only involves careful attention, and it involves a choice to be made, but as we continue to look, it also involves a cost to be counted. Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country, listen, and from your relatives and from your father's house. Do you see it there? God says, Abram, I want you to go, and this is what I want you to leave, Abram. I want you to go from your country, your familiar surroundings. I want you to leave your relatives, your family ties, and I want you to leave your father's house, everything of comfort that you know of. See, Abram, I not only want you to go somewhere, but in the process of going, you're going to have to leave something. You're going to have to pay a price, Abram. If you're going to do what I want you to do, if you're going to follow my calling, Abram, you need to know it's going to cost you something. Again, folks, where the struggle comes is not that God doesn't call us to do things that cost. He will. He does. But what we leave is so much less than what He's calling us to. But He doesn't always reveal that right away. God doesn't always say, look, I want you to leave your family, I want you to leave your country, I want you to leave your father's house, Abram, and I'm going to give you all this. You know, it's kind of like the game show. Do you want curtain number 1 or do you want curtain number 2? Right? And sometimes I think that's the way we think that God works. But that's not what He's doing here. But He is saying, look, Abram, there is a price to pay, and you, as you go, you need to know that you're going to be leaving something. And if we could take these 3 things that he mentions here and lump them into one category, this is what I would say. He's asking Abram to leave his security. Everything that he felt made him secure. His country, his family, his father's home, everything that was secure. And see, God will do that. Gary Tevis, every once in a while, we'll go out fishing. And, you know, Gary's great. He's always got everything ready to go, you know. I mean, right down to a sandwich for lunch. I mean, it's just great. And, you know, we'll have the poles, and he's got all the rigging, and everything's ready to go. But the crazy thing about it is, in order for us to go fish, actually go out and get fish, we have to leave the security of the dock. I mean, Gary could have everything ready to go. He could have the poles, the rigging, our sandwiches, water, our life jackets, you know, flare guns, whatever. He could have everything ready to go. And we could sit in the boat, tied to the dock, and talk about fish all day long. But until he unties those ropes, starts up the motor, and drives that boat out into the water, then we're just talking fish until he does that. We've got to leave the security of the dock and go out into the big blue in order to get the catch, right? See, that's what God does with us, folks. He says, look, I want to use you, but I want you to know something. I'm going to pull you away from some of your security. And again, don't think too big here. Let's bring it down to something small. God said, you know what? There's a need in that junior church with those little kids, and I want you to volunteer with those little kids. And you're going, oh, I can't speak in front of, even though they're little, it makes me so uncomfortable. Good. Yes. Good. Do you realize that if God calls you to do something that you can do all on your own, it's no big deal? When God calls you to do something that if He's not in it, you're going to fall flat on your face, that's a big deal. That's a God thing. You say, I can't speak in front of little kids. I mean, they might laugh at me. Or, yeah, they might. And you may look like a total idiot. Isn't that great? Because without God, you might not be able to do it, right? See, the reality is that God will call us to things that pull us out of our security to get us to lean on Him. Now, you read this. You can read it backwards, forwards, sideways, any way you want. You read Genesis chapter 12, and you will not find in there any place where God tells Abram specifically where he's going to go. He says, Abram, I will show you where to go. He never gives him a name of a country. He never gives him a map. He never gives him GPS. None of that. He just says, Abram, I'll show you. Start walking. Amen. Well, God, Can you point me like north, south, east, west? Abram, just start walking, I'll show you. But God, Abram, walk. You don't see any of that. There's no argument. Abram's left with a choice. He's got to decide, am I going to take the first step and am I going to leave? Am I going to trust God? Am I going to understand there is a cost here? I'm leaving country. I'm leaving family. I'm leaving security. And it's time for me to trust God. See, because when you continue to study the life of Abram, what you understand is that God was trying to build a man of faith. It took over 25 years for God to get him there. But he finally got to that place where he trusted God so much that he was willing to lay his own son on an altar and sacrifice him, believing, and we find this out later in the book of Hebrews, believing that God was even able to raise the dead. Even though Abram had never seen the dead raised before, he had gotten so far in his faith with God that he believed that God was even able to raise the dead. So even if he actually had to kill his own son, God would do something miraculous. That's how far he'd gotten in his faith. But it started when God called and said, Abram, I want you to take off. And I want you to leave your security. And I want you to trust me. Then number 4, would you put this down? When God calls, it involves a confidence to be placed. Now the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you. Abram, I'm going to show you the land. I'm not going to ask your opinion, Abram. When we get there, I'm not going to say, well, Abram, does this work for you, Abram? Is this enough water for you here, Abram? Is the grass nice? Is this good? You got enough grass here, Abram? Hey, you need to talk to Sarah, your wife, and find out, is she comfortable? Does she like the surroundings? No, Abram, I'm not going to ask you. I'm just going to show you, Abram, this is where I want you. And Abram, this is where I'm going to use you. God seldom asks our opinion on what he wants us to do. You know why? Because he knows for most of us our opinion's going to be negative. No, God, it needs to be bigger. No, God, it needs to be cooler. No, God, I need a little bit more to live on than that. God, you really want me to drive something that small? See, I believe this, folks. There's basically, when God calls us to a task, He's asking us to put our confidence in Him. There's basically 2 questions He's asking when He calls us. The first one is this. Would you put it down? Will you obey me? Will you obey me? I'm going to call you to do this. Will you take the step and obey me? And the second one is this. Will you trust me? Will you trust me? See, this is where it gets hard because, okay, God, I'm going to obey you, but I don't know if I can trust you. I would never say that. Maybe not out loud. God, there's no way I can live on that. God, there's no way I can do this job. God, there's no way I can live in this situation. God, there's no way I can do this ministry. God's saying, do you trust me? Do you trust that if I call you to some place, if I call you to do something, I'm going to provide you with everything that you need to do it? Do you trust me? Do you really think that I'm going to call you to some place to purposely make you miserable and useless and ineffective? Do you really believe that that's the kind of God that I am, the kind of Father that I am? Do you not understand that my vantage point is better than yours? That I can see a whole lot more than you can? Past, present, future? Will you obey me? Will you trust me? You say, well, I thought you said that, God doesn't call everybody to be a missionary. No, He doesn't. But He calls us all to something, And sometimes it's very simple. Like I said, sometimes it's in situations that you're in right now in your life and God is calling you to get out of it. God is calling you perhaps to go talk to somebody about a certain situation. Maybe you've been in a conflict with someone and you know what God says in His Word about going in love and confronting that situation, and you've refused to do it. And that's okay if you refuse to do it, but don't expect God to call you to anything else or tell you anything else. Don't get upset when God doesn't speak to you when you're not doing what He's already called you to do, right? You say, well, you don't understand. If I go and I talk to this person, they may get mad at me. They may not like me anymore. This may not turn out very good. You're right. It might not. Are you going to obey God? And are you going to trust God? See, that's what it boils down to. And then the last one is this, and to me this is really the icing on the cake, so to speak. When God calls, it involves, listen, countless blessings. Look what He says to Abram. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. And so you shall be a blessing. Not only am I going to bless you, I'm going to make you a blessing to others. And I will bless those who bless you. And listen to this. This is where He's taking care of them. And I'm going to curse those who curse you. And in you, listen, the families of the earth shall be blessed. Here's what God's saying. Abram, yes, I know what I'm asking you. I'm asking you to do something tough. I'm asking you to leave family. I'm asking you to leave country. I'm asking you to leave all your security. I understand it's going to be a tough deal, but I want you to know something, Abram. I will bless you in the process. And not only am I going to bless you, I'm going to bless others because of you, Abram. Folks, listen. When we follow God's call and God's plan and do what God has asked us to do, there is always blessing in it. For us and for others. Here's Abram. Abram very well could have said, God, I'm hearing you. It's not that I'm ignoring you. It's not that I can't hear you. I'm hearing you. And I understand that I've got to make a choice here, God. And I understand, God, that there's going to be a cost that has to be paid here. God, I understand I'm going to have to come to a point where I decide if I'm going to put my confidence in you. And I've come to that decision, God, I'm not going to do it. Now, here's the deal. We look at that and go, Abram, don't be so stupid. We know the rest of the story, Abram. You get to be a father of a great nation. And through you, the Messiah comes. Your line, the Messiah comes and Jesus is born. And that's how this says that the whole world is blessed through you, because the Messiah provides salvation for everybody. Abram, don't be an idiot. Say yes, Abram. Say yes. And you no, I don't think I want to do it. It sounds too hard. I don't want to leave. Besides, my dad's old. I need to take care. Who's going to take care of my dad? Now, you got to know, if that happened, God wouldn't be up there going, oh my gosh, Gabriel, what are we going to do now? He said no! Oh my gosh, I didn't plan on this. I thought Abram would say yes. What are we going to do? No. You know what God would have done? He would have called somebody else. Amen. But Abram would have missed out on all that God had for him. We wouldn't be talking about Abram today. We'd be talking about Bert or somebody, but not Abram. Because God would have said, okay, Abram, I don't need you. I was going to give you a chance to partner with me in the big deal that you can't even see right now, Abram. But since you said no, I'm going to take Sam and make Sam the father of the Jewish people. See, sometimes I think we have this twisted idea that God is somehow beholden to us. And boy, if I don't say yes, God's going to really be in big trouble. How are they going to set those chairs up on Sunday morning if I don't say yes? You know what? I shared this with you all a month or so ago when we were talking about money, finances. We don't push money real big here. We don't talk about it a whole lot. You know why? Because my God is bigger than your wallet. He's not beholden to me. God's not there going, well, I hope they give a little bit more this morning because things are going to be really tight this season. God doesn't need us, folks, for anything. But because He loves us and He wants best for us, He says, hey, I want you to be a part of this big deal that I'm going to do, and so I'm going to call you to be a part of it. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to make you. You're going to have to make a decision, and in the process, it's going to cost you something, and in the process, you're going to have to decide whether you're going to obey me, trust me, and whether or not it's going to be worth it. But I want to tell you right now, if you do this, there's going to be blessing in it. Oh, the blessing may not come as quick as you think it should. And it may not look the way that you think it's going to look, but I will bless you. And you know what else? When you obey and do what you're supposed to do, there's going to be blessing in it for others around you because you did what you were supposed to do. You say, Randy, how's that look? I want to know exactly how that looks. I don't know how it looks in your life. The only reason I know how it looks in Abram's life is because we can look back and see it in history. That's where the trust and obedience comes in. That's where you have to say, I believe this is a good God that I serve who has my best interest in mind. And when He says, hey, I'm calling you to this, I got to believe that He's got a good purpose and a good plan, and in the process of it, He's going to bless me and bless others as a result. But you'll never know it unless you do it. I've shared this with you before, and again, I just have to share. I have to share what I know with you folks, and it doesn't work the same way for everybody because God is not a cookie-cutter God. You understand that? That's what relationship is all about. One of the hardest things I struggled with when God was saying, when I really was sensing that God was saying, when I want you to go to Molokai. God, I don't want to go to Molokai. I'm a Florida boy. I want to stay here the rest of my life. I want my kids to experience the things that I experienced. I want them to be close to their grandparents. I don't want to leave this place. God, I want to stay here. I'm happy here. I like this. I have friends. People like me here. I don't want to leave this place. And it was a real struggle. And one of the biggest struggles, when it was all said and done, one of the biggest struggles was my children. God, I don't want to raise them that far away. I want them here around family and around things that I understand and know. I don't want to go to a place where I'm learning along with them, and God, I don't want any of that. And in the process of being in the Word and studying one day, God took me to that passage in Matthew where it says, unless you hate your father, mother, sister, brother, yea, even your own life, you can't have any part of me. And in the process of wrestling with that passage, God made it very clear. If you will follow me, I will take care of your children. But He didn't tell me how. He didn't give me all the details. He didn't give me a list. He didn't give me pictures in my mind. He just said, if you will follow me, I'll take care of your family. See, I'm not an Abram. But I kind of understand what Abram wrestled with a little bit. Because there was a choice to be made. And I knew there was a cost involved. And I knew it was about my security because, man, I was secure with everything around me and where I was and who I was and going to a place where I didn't really know what I was doing. I never pastored before. And Molokai, they don't even have a drive-through on Molokai. And dealing with all these things and coming to that point where it was like, okay, God, I believe you're a good God and you're not going to do something that's bad for me. You've got a plan and a purpose. I'm going to take this step. It wasn't like, yeah, here we go, woohoo! No, you know the first thing? Driving in this parking lot, I can close my eyes and remember it like yesterday. I was like, dear God, what have I done? And the struggle did not go away in a week, in a month. It was a number of years. always having to go back and going, God, did you really call me? And having to rehearse and go, yeah, He did. Yeah, He did. Darn, yeah, He did. But folks, listen. When God calls and you hear what He's saying and you obey what He's saying, He's going to bless you in the process. He has to, because that's part of His character. And God can't do anything that violates His own character, or He wouldn't be God. Would you bow your heads, please, and close your eyes?